Colombini, and I lead the life science practice here at the IEEE Standards Association. And welcome to Workshop 4 of the Connected Healthcare Cybersecurity Series. We launched this workshop series back in February 2021. We're now on number 4, and it's been an exciting build up. Each session has brought so many great experts and facilitation and open discussion with our audience and great ideas. So this has been a great journey. It's not yet complete, but this is the fourth and number 5. And today we have an exciting discussion and panel for you. So with that, this has been the series. We're going into about IEEE, and I'm going to introduce my co-host, which is Florence Hudson from the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub, who actually has been a great partner in envisioning the concept and the ideas, not only that we're talking about today, but how we bring this forward to actually make actionable outcomes and hopefully great impact on some of the challenges we're seeing in our connected healthcare system. So real quick, for those of you who are not familiar with the IEEE, the Institute of Electronic and Electrical Engineers, we are a global organization. We are a little more than 100 years old. We are the world's largest technology association. We are represented in every technology discipline and also across many vertical industries, looking at application and as well as just looking at the technology discipline itself. Our vision is really focused on advancing technology for humanity. This transcends every piece of work we do here at the organization, from standards development to education to exploring and doing outreach around new technologies. So with that, I just want to tell you a little bit about what we do here at the Healthcare Life Science Practice, which is very short, is as you imagine, we work with a global community of volunteers from many different backgrounds, both from clinical health to software, hardware development, to engineering and biomedical engineering, to really look at how these new technology applications can ultimately have positive societal impact in the form of giving quality, universal quality access to care for all, for better privacy and security for all patients, or just overall, how do we enhance patient outcomes through the use of these technologies? So our portfolio in the Standards Association, we have industry connections where a lot of these great ideas incubate. This is where a lot of the work of healthcare life sciences, we work with volunteers who think they have a great idea to a solution and really want to nurture it. Naturally, we have our standardization platforms. We have naturally our membership, and then we do other programs like conformity assessment or standardized registries. So I just want everybody to know that the slides are available in PDF format for download, which gives you a lot more detail about many different programs that touch what cybersecurity is talking about today. We have many different standards and industry connections programs that are addressing many different angles of it, which you can get a little more detail. Again, we are many practices here at the IEEE SA. I lead healthcare life science, but like I mentioned, we have the technical discipline in telecommunications and connectivity. We have foundational technologies, and then we delve into other vertical domains such as mobility and energy. So with that, I would like to bring on my co-host, Florence Hudson, to talk about the great work they're doing at the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub.
Thank you so much, Maria, and it's such a pleasure and an honor to work so closely with you and with IEEE. So I really enjoy my work with IEEE. I'm actually on the IEEE Engineering, Medicine, Biology Society Standards Committee, and I lead a working group on clinical Internet of Things, data and device interoperability with TIPS, which stands for Trust, Identity, Privacy, Protection, Safety, and Security. But my day job is working at Columbia University, and I lead the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub, which is an NSF-funded center. There are 4 of us around the United States, and we're a community convener, collaboration hub, and catalyst for data science innovation. So we have 4 focus areas, and one of them is health, one is responsible data science, the other 2 are education, data literacy, and urban to rural communities. The Connected Healthcare Cybersecurity Workshop series that this session is part of is very connected to our health initiative, as well as our responsible data science initiative, because that includes security, privacy, and ethics. And all of those are very important when you're looking at connected healthcare and integrated systems design. So we're really delighted that we can leverage the IEEE platform to bring more experts like all of you together to discuss the challenges and hopefully come up with some interesting solutions for the future. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Florence. And I mean, here at IEEE SA, appreciate not only the great work that the Northeast Big did, but all the work you do as a standards working group chair, and you're very involved in our work at the Healthcare Life Sciences practice. So for the audience, just a quick note, we also added a reference, uh, we want to call it post-read, pre-read for regarding the work that the standards working group that Florence is leading is 2933, which is involvement obviously with interoperability and security for clinical IoTs using TIPS. That particular working group is doing something on integrated systems design, and I've shared with you all on the chat the download PDF to some of the ideas that they're obviously percolating there in that group and have presented on. So if anyone gets a chance, please download that file.
Yeah, Maria, and I might just add that if anybody wants to participate in the working group, feel free to connect on the IEEE website. It's open, it's free. We have about 250 people involved, and we're working on the standard, which is really exciting. So I'll put my email in the chat, and if anybody wants to connect, feel free.
Awesome. Yes, please. And we have many other standards that might be of interest as well. Okay, so just to let you all know, we mentioned this is 4 of 5. We have her download off the GCHC Global Connected Healthcare Cybersecurity Workshop Series site, the actual proceedings from the first 3 workshops. So if you were not able to attend and you want to get actually to the detail in the short read, you can actually download each of those PDFs. Just visit those websites. Or just visit the main event website and you can download it. Workshop 4 will have a proceedings out, but it'll probably be within the next 2 weeks, and we will notify all registrants of that. Just a special thanks to our advisory board. They've been really great in helping us formulate the entire series, bringing great ideas and insights, recommendations, speakers, and just a special note, a special thanks to Macy, who is an intern working with Florence at the Northeast Big Data Hub, but she has been really the not keynote taker, but the leader behind putting all the proceedings of reports around for everybody to download and kind of getting to the essence of what we're talking about. So special thanks to Macy, who's been a great asset to our team. And then just a special thanks to Microchip Technology. As many of you are probably familiar with, this organization's been around for quite a bit some time, very reputable, known for obviously their chip design. But Microchip is a underwriter of today's workshop. So basically they're helping us to support getting the word out and hopefully, continuing the outreach to, support the great work we're doing here at the IEEE SA around the idea of cybersecurity and connected health from that point of view. So with that, real quick, just want to let you all, this is all your lines are muted as far as audience. We're doing the talking right now for the presenters. We will get to a point when we get into open facilitation at the end of the presentations where we invite the audience to raise their hand if they want to present an idea or respond to a question. From that point of view, we will all let you know when that happens. If you do have any issues, please put them in the chat. If you have any questions, you can also put them in the chat. The chat is the best way to talk to us. And if any other downloads, they're all available on the chat. Thanks to Victoria on our logistics teams who put them there for you. So this is our session. Welcome intro remarks done. Now we're going to get to the main panel session. So with that, the topic today is around the path to connected health cybersecurity with integrated systems design. ISD can mean many different things. Systems can mean many different things, especially in a connected healthcare system. So today we have with us Chris Riha, who is the project manager, National Emergency Telemedicine Critical Care Network at MITRE. We have Jigar Kadakia, Chief Information Security and Privacy Officer at Mass General Brigham. And we have Xavier Bingale from Security Product Manager of Microchip Technology, Inc. So each of our speakers are going to touch on case studies, actual real life situations they're going through, the technologies, the aspects, the framework. So this is going to be a very exciting presentation. But I ask all of you when going through this to start thinking about what do we envision as integrated system design and connected healthcare? And we really need to think about what exactly is connected healthcare. Is it just the clinical health technologies? Is it the informational technologies that support those clinical health technologies? And let's not forget those operational technologies. that are in the midst of this whole thing. And so as we go through this and you hear from the speakers and we come to you with some great polling questions towards a little bit in the next half hour or so, really start to think about that in the back of your mind. So with that, today I'm going to ask Chris to please present on his ideas and his case studies and share with you some of the work that he's been doing. Chris?
First of all, thank you, Maria, and thank you to everyone from IEEE, not only for this presentation, which I'm honored to be at, but also for the decades of work that folks at IEEE have done to move the ball forward, so to speak. A little bit of background on myself, as it's stated up on the slide. I'm working as one of the project managers on the NETSIN project, which is something that's really taken off due to COVID. As I put it, it's a silver lining around COVID because it's actually advancing technology. This is actually something that was sponsored by the U.S. Army and has some very good potential in the civilian world where it's starting to be deployed. Just as a caveat, the opinions and that I'm going to express are mine, not necessarily MITRE or any of the folks at NETSIN. So a little bit more background on myself. I've got 40 years of health technology behind me, and a lot of that is in security as well as interoperability of medical devices. The use cases I'd like to talk about today are two of them. One of them is past tense and one of them is current. The past tense one, I was engaged for a number of years with an organization out of Nashville, Tennessee. It was called the Center for Medical Interoperability. It was actually funded by healthcare delivery organizations to enhance the interoperability of medical devices. As everyone's aware, before you get into the first step of interoperability is secure connections. So the work that is being done by Florence and her team, and some of the work that was done by the AAMI as well as UL was quintessential to that. The other things that were very important was the semantic component of it, where we relied on the IEEE 11073 standards, particularly the 10101 for semantic interoperability. An interesting footnote on that is one of the facilities we were working with, a large hospital organization, we were creating specifications for the Center for Medical Interoperability. They wanted to test that within their organization. And one of the medical device systems they had, it was a patient monitoring system, didn't quite adhere to the nomenclature that was identified. And it was a minor change. It may have, I forget exactly what it was, but they may have been calling it ECG and EKG. And it was creating problems with their integration engine. So we actually went back to that large medical device manufacturer, explained the scenario to them, and instead of pushing back, they gladly made the change because it made their system more readily adaptable and interoperable. So that's an example of where the IEEE standards actually they helped a vendor and one of the consumers with their interoperability project. So kudos to everyone on that one. The current state use case I'd like to talk about is the NETSIN project. And the NETSIN project is a very interesting project. We're working to be able to deploy a system that has a very low footprint that can go into a rural facility that may be overrun with COVID patients that may not have the expertise to deal with the ventilator settings for these particular type of patients. So this is really, it's a telemedicine system on steroids, but it does require the connectivity of the medical devices at the bedside. So the remote providers would have access to that just as if they're standing at the patient's bedside. And again, this goes back to we're relying on IEEE standards for nomenclature, the 11073, 10101, as well as the technical standards that the IEEE has come up with in the 11073 family. So those are quintessential to making this work. And it is actually being deployed in several commercial hospitals throughout the United States. So there's also a syntactic component where we're working with nomenclature such as SNOMED CT or LOINC or the Hl7 standards of FIRE or 2.x. So again, these are very important components to make this work. The other thing that I want to talk about very briefly, you guys got my start out, is I'm also a guest lecturer at Virginia Tech's biomedical engineering program. And I've been doing that for 4 years. And it's really fun to watch the progress that's being made, a lot of it through the work that the IEEE is doing. When I first started giving this lecture, I had the notional concept of a hospital information system that's getting inputs from medical devices as well as lab results and all sorts of nursing documentation and physician documentation being fed into a clinical information system that would be able to go out and search for the latest research publications. With the work that's being done on the IEEE P2795 for health analytics, that has the potential to automate that and make what I've heard the term executable papers. So after a paper is published and it's through a peer review process, any type of algorithms that would be generated in that or additional data could be automatically fed into the caregivers and the patient potentially as well. So it's great stuff on the horizon, and want to encourage everyone to keep doing the good work that you guys have been doing.
Great. Thank you, Chris. This is, I know there's great work going on in MITRE. We also work with Dr. CJ Reiser and all the great things she's doing on her end and all her working groups. So we're great to have you guys a part of the organization, and the amount of great ideas you guys contribute is really hard to just sum up. So with that, I'd like to bring on obviously Jigar Kadakia from Mass General Brigham. You know, obviously you have your hands on a lot of great things there in your hospital system, and definitely want to hear what you guys are doing from your point of view.
Thank you. And thank everyone today for joining and listening to us. Appreciate IEEE inviting me to the session itself. So broadly speaking, I'll come about this maybe a little bit differently. So we, as everyone is aware, we're a hospital system, and our first and foremost goal is to treat patients. In order to treat patients, we rely on technology that is built upon standards, and we are working through a number of different standards within the organization. So there are wireless standards for the wireless networks. There are security standards for the security of the information in the network and the devices on the network. There's privacy standards for the privacy of the data in the network. And then there's the connectivity standards between interchanging interfaces, et cetera. So we work through all the different standards across the various boards. We are focused in on research for our patients, so research to help find cures. We are focused in on innovation. So what are things that we can do with our data set, with our patients, to come up with new innovative treatment options or new innovative cures or approaches to medicine. And then we have our clinical space, which is really focused in on treating the patient as they come into the hospital system. We have thousands of medical devices that are at the patient bedside, all the way through the top of the electronic health record. So we are interacting with devices throughout the system. Each system is providing a specific data set. The data set is being leveraged inside the electronic health record, as Chris kind of mentioned before. And then we're using that to kind of treat our patients from an overall perspective. So it's important for us to be on top of the standards, and the governing bodies of the standards provide great reliance and sophistication with regards to the products that come out of leveraging the standards. There's a continuity with regards to the standards themselves. And those are important as we think about a large system with varying devices across the system. Innovations have really been developed since really COVID. So you have seen across not only across the US, but across the world, the innovation in medicine and treating patients. Early on in the pandemic, as everyone is aware, there was a lot of concern around the safety of the physicians and the nurses and the folks in the hospital treating COVID positive patients that were in the hospital. And a lot of the innovation that came out of that was varying technologies so that nurses, physicians, and doctors didn't have to go into patient rooms. So they used remote technologies to communicate with the patient, to observe patients, et cetera. All these were based on wireless technologies, IEEE standards, et cetera. And that provided a way for the patient to be isolated, but also have the continuity of care that was needed as part of their treatment pattern. It also protected the caring physicians, the nurses, and the other staff that supported the patient. Every time it limited the number of times they had to enter a room. At this, early stages and throughout the pandemic, it allowed the patient to communicate with friends and family because, as many are aware, there was a restriction of the number of visitors in any healthcare facility just to maintain the safety of the patients and the clinical staff. So these technologies became far-reaching across the US, and we leveraged a number of these technologies as part of the patient care experience. The last piece I would talk about are, Hl7 fire standards are very important into the healthcare space, as there's a number of applications being created across the US for patient purposes, dashboarding, et cetera, that provide more information for the patient. As everyone is well aware of, the patient owns the right to their data, and we, as people that have custodians of the data, have an obligation to try to get the data to those individuals. We want to do it in safe and secure manners. There are a number of third-party apps now available that leverage these technologies to provide a mechanism to transport the data in a safe and secure way that is consistent across the universe. So application development is consistent. The fire standards are consistent. Hl7 standards are consistent. And that provides a mechanism to harmonize the environment and allow the data to transfer throughout. So we're highly interconnected, and that's how we operate. Clearly, there's room for improvement in the connection space, whether it's improvement with regards to the endpoint devices or the channels that the devices communicate on. But either way, those are all factors in how the ecosystem is organized. So with that, I'll hand it over to Maria.
Yes, thank you, Jigar. And you just brought something to my mind like a flashbulb when you said fire, right? I know that there's always conversation about all these new apps and devices, being obviously compliant with fire, and then naturally we have Hl7. So there's you just opened my eyes to a whole new level of things to be interconnected here, as well as all the other life-saving technologies you guys are operating. So that's something for all of us to think about. Thank you. And with that, I'd like to bring on our final panelist, Xavier Vignolet from Microchip Technology, and he has obviously working with many different providers, technology companies, and obviously systems to bring a very different perspective in the great things that they're doing and how they're making an impact in this area. So Xavier?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. So I'm Xavier Vignolet from Microchip. I'm product manager for the secure product group. What we do in this group are basically TPM is what the security world knows us for. We've been doing that for about 20 years. So essentially it's security storage in silicon. I'm also part of the security console inside the company, and we work with this group to homogenize our security offering, security message, and so forth. So it's interesting. If you look at Jigar, I'm 180 degrees to where he would fit in the ecosystem, and really at the bottom of this network at the edge node, inside the gateway, inside the hardware. So with the line of work I have, I'm a marketer, but also the business development manager for the Americas, and I lead the business team globally there for that product line. We see a ton of variety on how security is handled at the root, at the embedded level there. So if we go across the way I like to divide simplify the medical ecosystem, got the hospital environment and the patient himself, and they should be connected in somehow. And we look at, when we see our customer, we can see the journey of the patient that they're trying to address, meaning from the time of the medical incident to the time where the patient is stable or fully recovered. There's a lot of monitoring that happens across time, right? And during that monitoring across time, what are the phases? There are the phases where the patient get to the hospital, the phases at the hospital, the phases back at home, right? And those phases have an associated time with it and an associated network to it, right? And Chris and Jigar mentioned it, right? Interoperability is key within that life cycle. So when it comes down to interoperability and networks, then that takes me to technologies. And I've witnessed something similar, where there's been a huge improvement in the past 6 years, I'd say. Not quite there yet. And the reason is the complexity of the technology that are provided to solve situations and problems in the medical space are pretty wide. And I think this is where the need for a standard to homogenize those things will help the situation here. And I'll give a few use cases here and there. The first thing that I want to give is, when it comes down to interoperability, one of the good things that happens, but that drags a couple of weaknesses, is the usage of standard technology, something we preach in the world of security. Used a standardized connectivity, because it's been tested by the community over and over and over, and it's the volume of testers that make that technology robust. And I'm referring to technology like Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or things like that. Those are the things where we've seen mistake happening, and there's public disclosure on that. Is as soon as you get into proprietary protocol, there are much less testers, obviously, because by the definition of the technology, it's proprietary, and the volume of tester being much less, you have that much more vulnerability inside those things. So that's one of the things we've seen in the medical space from the embedded side. The usage, a lot of usage of Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, so that kind of normalize the network at the bottom of the chain, right? There's still quite a bit of things to do in the network itself, which Jigar was mentioning too. So the use case here would be, on the good side, we have that interoperability via standard connectivity technology. The use case here is we have one of our partners. He's the CTO of the guy in person is the CTO of microchip design partners. The person is very hands-on, on top of being the CTO of his own company. And his son was wearing a pacemaker, Bluetooth enabled. Well, he knew exactly how to spoof the system to control the heartbeat of his son. That was quite terrifying. So again, the standardized technology has pros but also cons, because the way they're some of them are defined. I would argue like the Bluetooth technology, when it comes down to medical, you want to have a one-to-one relationship between the device and the data. Again, back to the patients owning the own data, you need to protect that. You need to, we talk about a lot of encryption. Encryption is not a lot, it's not enough alone. You have to correctly protect the identity, those are cryptographic keys and so forth and so forth. And now I've just tossed a bunch of complex notions that is, they are not necessarily easy for one or even two firmware engineers to grasp, not only grasp, but implement correctly. Thinking about the life cycle of the code itself, the hardware itself, that means I'm talking about firmware management, device management and stuff like that. All of that packed into an embedded device, that becomes challenging, and that they have timelines, right? They have business timelines with respect to release their products to. That forces those experts to sometimes take shortcuts to release the product there. And now you can see the number of backdoors that are being left on the side, and that's how you end up having a son spoofing the Bluetooth of the pacemaker of his own son, right? It's quite terrifying. Again, standards like Florence is driving there, I think we're going to push, or at least recommend practices on the short and hopefully push these practices to become a must in the longer term. to establish solid foundations right at the embedded level. You can do a ton of things at the network. If you have exposure right there at the roots where the devices are, you can do a lot of damage in the network. Second example is, I don't know if it's if the crowd will define that as a corner case. I'll use my personal example. I've used a heart monitor just for a benign reason. Nothing really, nothing terrible came out of it. But I had to wear a heart monitor for 2 weeks, and wanted to monitor how things are going and whatnot. And that was an interesting experience being in that embedded space. You had a patch with a Bluetooth, but now there we go, because of HIPAA compliance, the data couldn't go directly through my phone into a cloud. I had to actually wear, funny enough, a third phone. I have 2 phones, one for work, one for my personal needs, and now I had a third phone for just monitoring those data. And that was the interesting bit, because during that time, what happened was, with my line of work, I had to travel internationally. I lose a network. So because the contract on that phone provided by the OEM company didn't have a plan that would take into account going abroad. It's outside the US. So discussion with the doctors, negotiation with the insurance because of the plans and so forth and so forth. At the end of the day, it's a 5-digit check that the insurance is going to have to cut to the hospital. So interoperability here is again paramount. And especially with I think the era of COVID has pushed a lot of boundaries. That's I think going to be a huge challenge. Is travel has been absolutely booming pre-COVID. Who knows what's going to happen post-COVID? But international interoperability is something that still needs to be considered. Again, this is a good thing why we have the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi and those standard technologies. When it comes down to plans and roaming rather, that's probably the better word to use. There are still things to consider. And then I'll finish with that and hand it back to probably Florence. I talked a lot about the foundations. You verify your identity, you make sure your software is up to date, don't leave default passwords on your systems, make sure you have a disclosure system. All of those things. The good thing that we see is governments are stepping up. We see the UK governments have been probably the first to put an effort and a commitment to it. I started to mandate a few of those financial practice for consumer IoT. It's not extended beyond the consumer market, but at least for consumer IoT. The rest of Europe is following, and they have about 13 principles, if I'm not mistaken. I just mentioned 4 of them, the 4 probably that are going to see the first mandates there. And we know the NIST is working, has been mandated by the White House to do similar things. So that's, I think all of that's going to help. And now if we have an IEEE standards for the medical field, so that's the other good thing. It's narrowed down to a segment. And I really hope to see foundational practices coming out of those standard efforts. And that's all I had for today, Florence, or Maria, if you want to take it over, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Xavier. That's really interesting that you mentioned about the different communication protocols and that kind of thing. One of the work we're doing in a group, Wearables and Medical IoT Interoperability Intelligence, which we call WAMI, is basically looking at how do you have this personal patient area network that continues to be, is not disrupted, right? No matter where you are, if you travel, if you are at home or you're out and about. And it's one of the challenges they're trying to solve in the form of standards so that the patient doesn't feel like they have to be restricted to one particular location in order for their in-body device or on-body device or whatever it might be being used for, medical diagnosis or, delivery, therapeutic delivery or that kind of thing. So yes, we are quite aware that this is we love the proliferation of more devices and wearables. We also know that the challenges are, exponentially growing when these things are sort of not addressed and in a way that can make it work for everybody seamlessly. So very good point that you brought up to everybody. Okay, so before we get to asking our panelists their questions, we have questions for the audience in the form of interactive polls. So what we would like to do is pose our first question to the audience. And it's a simple, just check your answer here. And it basically says, do you find that a single reference architecture, RA, for systems of systems is suitable to address the growing challenges in the connected healthcare domain? So audience will give you about 60 seconds to answer the question. It's a pretty much simple question. Just if you could answer yes or no, and then we'll ask the panelists to sort of react to the live results that we get from you all. So, and believe me, I don't believe there's any wrong or right answer. So it's just your observations, your knowledge, your research, whatever might indicate. A few more seconds. We have about 15, maybe a little less than 10 seconds left in this poll. We'll commence the questions to the panelists right after. We have one more poll for the audience. We'll do some discussion and then we'll get your questions to the panelists. Okay. So we've ended the poll. Here are the results. So, wow, 76% of our audience said no, that a single reference architecture for the SOS is suitable to address the growing challenges in the connected healthcare domain. Panelists, do you have any reaction? Did you think it would be more yes? Do you think no seems likely? Anything, insight you would like to share on these results?
This is Chris. Go ahead.
Sorry, Chris. So I would just say I would have thought more people would be no, because I don't believe there's a way to create a one single architecture that would fit for everything. I think there is probably a representative architecture that might meet 50 or 60% of everything. But there's going to be so much uniqueness and differentiation that a single architecture, I don't think could meet everything. Chris?
Okay.
Yeah, I concur, and I was in the no voting stage. I think if you have a single architecture that's going to try and you're going to get a one size that doesn't fit any well. There is actually a really nice reference architecture for certain medical devices that's put out by Johns Hopkins University, their APL lab. It's called the Madeira architecture. So if anyone's interested, please take a look at that. But it doesn't encompass a number of different things within a medical organization, imaging devices for one. So I'm in complete agreement with the majority of the respondents.
Yeah, and same thing here. The reference design strategy is good to show good practices, right? To inspire other architecture to be more compatible. But if we look at older network that need to fit into an architecture, how is retrofit compatibility taken into those type of architecture? And that's where things tend to bottleneck. So yeah, not surprised of the answer there.
Great. All right. So I feel like we have consensus in this one for sure. Excellent. Okay. So I believe we have our next polling question, which we'll share with the audience as well, 60 seconds as well, is what do you find as the greatest challenge to designing a system of systems for connected healthcare system? And you can choose the answer. We're saying the greatest. I'm sure maybe more than one would apply here, but from your observations. Thankful I didn't put in all of the above option in this poll because I feel like all of them do apply, but I really wanted to see where everyone was. Maybe one was more leaning towards the other, and that was the hope of this poll. Okay, so we a little over 60 seconds. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to share the results. Oh, interesting. So it looks like 50, well, the majority, a small majority, 56% of the respondents said that the greatest challenge is lack of system-wide trust amongst users, partners, and everyone in between. So maybe Chris, I'll start with you. Is there anything here you thought would have been more, or this seems on par with what you guys are doing and what you're seeing?
Actually, if you would have had all of the above, that would have been my answer. But I actually went with the lack of system-wide trust. And if you think about the challenges that healthcare systems are on, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the work that IEEE is doing at Mass General. Hospitals are under attack. And in that same scenario, from ransomware, all sorts of other malware and ickies that are out there, but in the same note, they're getting pushed to connect more medical devices and enhance the connectivity of the folks or their caregivers. So the trust issue is huge, and it's, as I said, they're getting it from both sides. They want more devices connected, but there's more liability and more risk for that.
Great, thank you. Jigar?
Yeah. So I agree, right? The manufacturers of devices have varying standardizations with regards to how the device was created. I mean, they follow the minimum standards, but it's only the minimum standards. And then each product manufacturer has a different set of standards that they follow off the core standards. So you never have consistency across multiple types of devices. And then in the medical space, devices have to be FDA approved and sanctioned. And so once you've gone through an FDA approval process, which takes years and a lot of effort, manufacturers and others are hesitant to make changes because there's a sense that you have to go through the certification process again, and they don't want to do that. So what ends up happening is you have a hole. And then it's up to the security and privacy teams at the different entities to try to fill those holes to reduce the risk of the risk of security on the device at the local location.
And Xavier?
Yeah, I mean, again, not surprised here of the results, especially the third answer standing out. I've worked with various different groups and connectivity standards and whatnot, and that always stand up as being one of the problem that shows up once the standard have done a lot of progress. It's the notion of trust, right? So I'll give you a couple of examples. Right now we've worked with the wireless charging group, right? Nothing really connected, but you're going to have a phone that land up into a wireless charger. The last revision of standards mandate for a notion of trust. So now what they are forced to do to establish that, to select one root of trust, right? One company that will be the trust for the entire ecosystem. And that's what it forces you to do. The feasible thing there, it's the phone of the charger. It's one product, the phone, on another product, the charger. That's feasible. Where it becomes much harder is you have a global ecosystem, and that's one of the struggle of, for example, the long range, low power, the LoRa type of connectivity. You have a connected space that is pretty elegant, but there is no strain of trust, but it's not governed. It's not managed by something because they go cross government, they go into star and mesh network, and now that notion of selecting an authority, an authority. It's difficult. The organization has to make the conscious decision. This is what's going to happen. That's the decision that's going to happen, meaning I'm going to choose a company that's going to be my authority. And that's the paradox we've seen here. In the medical world, well, you have the networks are governed by PKI today, and so are the connectivity, which is not a bad thing, I think. But then it's the international aspect then, right? Or the cross-state aspect, or the cross-company aspect. How is that authority going to be governed? Having a central authority is the central authority the solution? That's where business models will fight. And it's the eternal corporation versus idealistic notion of security purists that we're going to deal with.
Excellent. Thank you, Xavier. It's interesting that obviously 56% of the audience chose this option. If this was a blockchain discussion, I feel like the blockchain experts would be like, well, this is where we can actually help, right? Because it's all about how do we use the blockchain to restore that trust amongst partners. But this is not a blockchain discussion for today. So thank you all. And thank you, audience, for responding to the polls. So we already got some great questions from the audience. So I'm gonna pose them in the order that they were sent to us via the chat. So if I'm out of order, I apologize up front, but I think I'm pretty good here. So I think the first one is for you, Jigger. It says, what are the improvements or room for improvements in your organization for better interoperability with Fire and Hl7 implementation?
So there's a lot of room for opportunity around those standards. So those standards have really come about and have become very well leveraged. I would say maybe in the last 3 to 4 years. They became memorialized. The EHR vendors, there's really 3 or 4 major EHR vendors out there. They've adopted the standards, which has created an ecosystem of applications that leverage those standards. So, anything new or relatively new in the last 3 to 4 years have adopted those standards. The issue for us would be anything that we have to do a lot of modification to do the interoperability pieces with on those standards. For older systems and interconnections. That's where we have struggled. Hopefully things will continue to evolve as we decommission older systems and replace them with newer systems. The newer systems have modern technology. Many of the newer systems are cloud-based, which are ripe for these types of interactions and standards. So overall, there's a bit of a have and a have-not space. And so we're focused on improving the have-nots as we continue to evolve the haves.
Great, thank you, Jigger. So we also had another question, and this is an area that we're getting more and more focused on, and I guess this is posed for everybody. Obviously we're talking, obviously it comes from a hospital system, so naturally that's the focus on his part, but it says, what about the work that's being done like for healthcare at senior living centers? We know more that there's mobile care at home for the aging population. Obviously, we see this in robotics and telemedicine. We see it in extended reality. I don't know if any of the panelists have like sort of just started to scratch the surface in this area, or if you're seeing more of that conversation coming up or anything of that nature.
Yeah, so definitely we are seeing more of the conversation. I would also say, COVID remote monitoring systems became very evident, and there's a need for remote monitoring systems. With regards to monitoring systems, whether it's diabetic monitoring, blood pressure monitoring, or other types of monitoring, those are all valuable monitoring solutions that a lot of patients can leverage with very minimal technical knowledge or minimal system knowledge at home. So in the comfort of their own home, they can kind of maintain some level of awareness of their symptoms, and then alert their doctor or hospital if things change. So those things became more evident during COVID, and we need to continue to evolve that. We need to make sure the systems on the other end are certified or hospital kind of grade systems versus the wearables and the consumer grade systems that are out here. While the data is good on kind of the consumer grade stuff, it's not certified at healthcare. So you run into kind of the other issues associated with non-certified technology. The reliability, the consistency, can you use it for clinical decision-making, those types of things versus a certified system. So yes, they are out there. Yes, we need to leverage more of them, and it's an evolving technology as we continue to become more remote. and more reliant on cell phones and other types of technology, including wearables, I think this is an area that's going to grow tremendously.
For sure.
A little more detail on that too, a little history. When the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was passed in 2009, cash for clunkers, so to speak, it also had the High-Tech Act, which funded the hospitals and the providers for their EMRs. It actually gave them really strong financial incentives. It neglected nursing homes and LTC facilities, as well as any state institution that was supposed to ingest this. So they're playing catch up on the home health, actually in the senior living centers and the nursing home facilities. They don't have the infrastructure. A lot of them don't have the infrastructure because it wasn't financially incented in the ARA. They're catching up, but they're doing it at a much slower pace. And I completely agree with what you guys said, is with the advent of COVID, the home health functionality went up with the medical devices, but there is a caveat to that as to the quality of the data, which is why data provenance is very important. Where is this data coming from and how much can it be trusted? It's a great question, Terrence.
A lot a layer to that. It's interesting. I've never met Jigar and Chris, but looks like we're all on the same page on every question. What I see from our industry, so I'm not dealing with hospital or insurances per se. We deal with the companies that buys our semiconductors, put it into an actual device that will connect something. And what the type of customer we deal with, what they're reporting to us, it looks like there are, I was going to say two models. Jigar mentioned a third one, which is the at-home model. That's the insurance offering a service, and by offering a service, pushing a device into those healthcare home. That's one angle. But we've seen a shift, and it's probably due to probably the adoption and the adoption of those embedded devices by the medical corps actually. And like Jigar said, what are those data worth and how are they trustworthy when it comes down to medical compliance needs and so forth and so forth. So we see the second service is, on one side we have the insurance pushing the hardware into the assisted living home, and then the second one, it's starting to come, but it's a bit behind. The hospitals are starting to push that, and I think there will be a shift towards the hospital service in the next few years. And it's interesting because I think it correlates with what you said, Chris, right? About that political situation, and that does make sense. I think that's what gave a more open market opportunity for anyone to seize that market first, while the bigger institutions like the hospital are really, my opinion, are probably a better medical fit to address that space from a data quality standpoint. So that makes sense now.
Great. Florence, I believe 2933, I think, has a topic, right, around telemedicine and the aging, right?
We do. We have a number of use cases. So in the P2933 working group, we have a number of use cases. One I like to call wearables in the wild, where you're not in any type of facility, you're not at home. Like it could be, I think we have Farmer Jones or Farmer Brown, they're out in the field and they pass out, and how does someone get an alert? How do they get their information? He's not awake to tell them anything, so we have a number of use cases, including all the way in the wild, which is you could be anywhere. The wilder side is if, like Xavier was saying, is you're not where you usually are. You're in a different country. They have different communication protocols. They have different regulatory schemes. And how do you actually get this all to work together? And it's very challenging. And so it can include hospitals, healthcare facilities. For the Veterans Administration, it is your house. A lot of the veterans that are home, they've been working on that for a while. It could be out, where they are on site in the field. So we are trying to look at the different use cases. At the same time, when you're dealing with something so expansive, where, how do we, secure, connected healthcare? oh, that's gigantic. And it's getting bigger because as the panelists are saying, there are more devices. There are the clinically proven devices, and, that are FDA approved or approved, in other countries in different ways. Then there are the consumer devices. So it's very challenging. But what we're trying to do is take a couple of use cases that are very people can understand, so we can communicate this. So you were mentioning one side of it. The other is that we're thinking, well, if we start with a device like, a glucometer and an insulin pump, like a lot of people know what those are, it actually is important in some underserved populations as well. So it allows us to have a more, complete picture of some of the challenges. And we also think about how we're going to create some type of framework, standards that can enable trust and identity. We were talking about how do you validate identity, identity of the human, identity of the device. How do you keep track of that? How do you maintain the privacy of the data? How do you protect the humans and the device and the data? How do you keep people safe and all the information secure? So we're looking at how we can do this. We're trying to start, at IBM, I was there many years, used to call it FOAK, first of a kind. Let's do a first of a kind model, that can help us communicate the story, the narrative, and then pull the technology implications into it. And it would include the things that, my colleagues here are talking, our colleagues are talking about, fire, Hl7, SNOMED, low ink, how do you connect this all? How do you use, trusted compute modules or TPM and encryption? How do you think of this at the hardware, firmware, software, and service level? And so we geeks that are either manufacturers, or CISOs or whatever, we have to worry about how this is all playing together. But then at the same time, we would love it if the citizens, the patients know to look for this stuff, right? They might not be looking at the certs and the DHS, and FDA communications that are coming out about the vulnerabilities. But our vision actually is we're creating this standard integrated between IEEE and underwriters laboratories. And the idea there is, I usually say when I was a little girl, I would look for the little UL tag on electrical cords to make sure that we were safe. I would love to have something like that regarding tips. So I envision that in 5 to 7 years, when some little girl, they're saying, we're going to give you an insulin pump, she says, does it have tips? And so they know enough to make sure that they're safe. And we, the geeks, make sure that we're architecting it and manufacturing and deploying it in a way that does keep them safe, secure, and private. So that's kind of a long answer, but it's kind of the whole picture.
Right. Yeah, and so Florence is going to share with you all the draft architecture framework that they're doing in 2933 right after this last interesting question that we got from the audience. So we talked about the ecosystem, we talked about standards, we talked about the players, the stakeholders, and we forgot one important one, which everybody always asks first, is compliance policy, the FDA. So someone actually is going there in the audience, and I want to thank them for it. And the question is how do medical device regulations shape the manufacturer's preparedness for cybersecurity attacks during the design phase? Per the FDA law, any changes done to a device, even a software update, will literally classify the device as a different one. Yet the very same law demands the manufacturers to ensure device safety during its life cycle. And this is the conundrum. So any of the panelists, Chris, Jugar, Xavier, have any comment about that? We know FDA is sort of always updating their policies.
I'll take that. The FDA has actually come out with a couple of guidance documents for manufacturers over the last several years on how to bake in cybersecurity. And they've also recently come out with, I think it was a couple of months ago, and some of my colleagues at MITRE were instrumental in this, a risk modeling procedure for vendors to really, or OEMs to take a look at as they design their systems. Because as we all know, if you do it on the front end, it's going to be much easier and much better than trying to patch it in at the back end. So the FDA is trying to be proactive.
Yeah, they're trying to get ahead of it, but as manufacturers and others determine, guidance isn't law or a rule, and so if it's not a rule that is put on the books, then it's a recommendation, and if it costs money and it's complex, then a lot of people aren't going to follow a recommendation, even though it's best practice.
Yeah, no, hard to add anything to that. I had a personal experience which probably correlates with what Hanan is saying. I went through a coordinated vulnerability disclosure at some point. That was the #1 question all the medical guys were asking. So what does it mean to me? Because the FDA is imposing that on my design. So we had to explain that there was no changes at the code level, and all the changes that were being made to correct that or not impacting that type of thing. So there is some flexibility into it. You want to see, if you have to do, from a security standpoint, if you have to do a change in your code that will reclassify your device, that's probably a high impact vulnerability, I would guess. So probably worth changing the product there. But again, I'm not too in tune of what the FDA mandate or not. I would hope there is room for updatability. If not, there's a big conundrum. Yeah.
It's really going to be it can be market driven. If you look at how the DICOM standard evolved, that was something that came up was developed by the ACR and NEMA, and there was no regulatory, but it was market driven. If folks like GIGAR are saying, okay, here's what I need you to have to put a medical device in my facility, and there's more collaboration on that. There's documents that are out there now, the MDS2 document, and Dr. Julian Goldberg at Mass General at their MDP and P lab is actually doing a lot of research on a checklist that would be more universal for the consumers to use. Once those start getting implemented, that's going to lead the vendors to a more standardized approach, in my opinion.
Great. Anybody else comment on this? FDA always draws comments from everybody from all walks of life. All right, so we have another question for our panelists. It's this is along the line of, you know, AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning. We know this topic is permeating everywhere in the healthcare system, of course, impacting devices as well and connected healthcare. So the question is, you know, AI ML technology has been quietly integrated into systems for many years, and it's becoming more prominent in systems of systems. So the question to you all is, what role and where can AI ML play in an integrated system for connected healthcare? And what can it do in terms of, you know, interoperability, data and device verification, validation, security, privacy, or some other major benefit in the great challenge that we are facing right now? Anybody want to go first on that one?
So I think it plays an important role. We have lots of data at the hospital, and these tools and concepts can help us analyze the data more readily in a more effective manner. It can also help us to come to conclusions and come up with far-reaching abstract concepts that maybe otherwise we wouldn't pick up through normal data analysis. So I think they are important, and they play an important role as we continue to advance technology, specifically healthcare technology, because it's being driven by a lot of technical changes and by big data, if you want to use the word big data, from an overall perspective. So I think they're important. They play a very important role, and we need to continue to refine the algorithms that are used to do machine learning and you know, AI, et cetera, to kind of take those findings and improve healthcare from an overall perspective.
Great.
I can complement the answer there. From what we see on the embedded side, it's and I'm talking about security, right? Cybersecurity is the topic of today. Monitoring is something that we see often completely being missed, essentially. So it's nice to have your concept of trust, your concept of encryption within the network and all of that, but you need to monitor that traffic. You need to audit and monitor those things. And there are companies that are, I'll mention AWS, that's the one I'm familiar with their device defender topics. What they do, they detect static data, But then what they're doing too, that's a new feature they launched within their product, is they'll start to look at the behavior of data of devices that authenticate through that service. And they start to build some type of, it's more machine learning at that point than AI itself, that they start to build a model. And that goes back to what Jigar is saying. We're just at the infancy of those things, of those models. That needs to start, first of all, perfected to be, reliable in the long term. So monitoring in the world of connected devices where I see AI having a solid place there. And there are other companies. I remember Google giving a talk a while back on preventing DDoS attack, through their some type of artificial intelligence product that they put in place on connected devices network.
I think there's tremendous potential, but if you talk to data scientists in the healthcare field, they spend a lot of their energy trying to normalize the data. And if that could be done through standards or whatever the work that the IEEE is doing, that would greatly improve the quality of the data and the amount of work required to ingest it.
Excellent. Florence, how about you? I think your group is also attacking this question.
We are,
One
yeah.
way.
So we call it AML, we gave him a name. And so AI/ML, artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I have a number of comments on this. One is, years ago, I was VP of Marketing and Strategy for the mainframe at IBM, and we actually used a type of artificial intelligence and machine learning all the way down at the chip level in the system. So we had this thing called chip sparing technology. So it can be used inside the technology. I don't know if that's what AWS is doing as well as Xavier and the servers. I'm not sure how, because they talk about serverless. So they're at a higher level.
Yeah, they're at the high level. Yeah.
Okay. So, so AI and ML can be used at the higher level, at the system of systems level, but all the way down in the hardware. So the idea is to look at how we can leverage this innovation now that it's real. AI was like a concept for decades. So the way we would do it in the mainframe at the time, which I think they still do, is that we would have chip sparing technology. So we would have the firmware and the software, well, the firmware really would keep an eye on the chips. And if they started acting funky, like they weren't giving repeatable answers, they were slowing down a little bit, then they would actually vary that chip offline and have a spare chip that they would vary online. So it's kind of artificial intelligence for behavior assessment for technology, right? How is the technology behaving? And the technology could be behaving poorly. It could, be at risk, or it could be that, there's a behavior that is an anomaly that could mean that it's being attacked. So I think there's an opportunity to really think about how AI and ML can be used at many different levels: the hardware level, the firmware level, the software level, the service level, and then across at the system of systems level. Any comments that our colleagues have on that?
I mean, you're just describing on my side, you're describing a big shift in the semiconductor industry that's hitting us at the chip level we've implemented that into extremely, extremely small devices. Probably what you're referring of big processors. What I'm talking about are down to, less than 32 bits devices, microcontroller devices. It's extremely constrained, and those things are offering a land of opportunity. One of the big thing we're exploring is touch control. So it opens up a ton of different gesture in that market for various different controls. While before, the example I'm being given is quite interesting. I don't know how to connect necessarily to the health market, but to develop a sign, we had like essentially 4 signs, really, of up, down, left, right, and turn right. And it would take a long time. And we're talking, I can't remember if it's several weeks or days to develop an algorithm to do that. Now in less than 10 minutes, you can develop anything you want just because of what you described. It's quite phenomenal. So the opportunity become endless for that space, for example.
Yeah, that's excellent. So are you saying you're using this type of capability down inside these tiny devices? Because that was my hope. Oh, that is excellent to hear.
Absolutely, yeah.
How long have you been doing that?
About a year, I think. About a year, yeah.
That's
Not
great.
my business unit, but some sisters business unit have been putting out solutions now that are going in production as we speak. So it's it's there.
That's excellent. That's so good to hear. That gives me so much comfort. And we actually need to keep thinking that way of how can we apply these techniques in new ways. And as we were saying too, different data science techniques, right? I work in the Data Science Institute at Columbia University. And so there are many ways to leverage data science tools and techniques, and they keep evolving and changing. There's so much opportunity.
The one acronym that I'm going to add, one acronym I'm going to add to the phrase NLP, natural language processing. There's a product that's been out on the market for a number of years. It's an acuity monitoring system that's used in healthcare organizations. And one of the things that this vendor has found, it's an interesting history behind it, is that it's actually the nurse's notes that can be more predictive than lab results or physiological monitors, because they can actually see things and make comments prior to the physiological responses. So if you put some natural language processing in there, that would greatly enhance the ability of the AI.
That's a very interesting insight. And I've heard that from multiple connections, that, and the nurses have an instinct too. It's like, Daniel Kahneman thinking fast and slow, the Nobel laureate, where, the people who have the instinct because they have so much experience, they can tell what's going to happen. And that's very valuable. Very good point. It looks like we have more questions in the chat.
Yeah, it was a follow-on question to what you were talking about with the AI and the chips. It says, where digital is this where a digital twin technology can provide simulation and opportunity to test critical aspects of network devices, etc.?
There could be. Good old-fashioned simulation can work too. Digital twins can work. I think one of the challenges and opportunities we always have is to make sure we're doing it as simply and effectively as we can. But we could potentially leverage, digital twins in this situation. Any of our colleagues that want to mention, are any of you using digital twins in this type of environment to test things?
I can speak up. We see, to me, that's a big yes, without hesitation. That's where we see my customers going. And the digital twin, right? Your OT versus IT. It's, they try to mirror behaviors. It's conceptually, they like to do that. Are they putting enough time to actually do it correctly is a different story. The concept, yes, definitely. This is where digital twin kicks in, yeah.
And are you using it across information technology and operational technology? I heard you mention IT and OT.
Yeah. I mean, it's all my customers. I see them doing that. We provide them the OT side of things. They have the IT, and that's where both Jaguar world and mine are starting to connect. Yeah.
In Chris's world too, I think.
Yes.
Okay. We actually got another question. This is one that we are seeing in our telehealth incubator program, but it says, since healthcare is moving from a hospital-centered approach to a patient device-centered approach, what are some development in this regard? For example, what can be expected from devices, from a device perspective in the near future, or even potentially long-term, how it will change?
So I think the efficacy of the device is going to be ever more paramount in the future, as we rely on devices and other things to do clinical care. Telehealth has showed you can do a lot of things remotely with a doctor on a phone, or whether you use Zoom or a telehealth platform. So it's all possible. Kind of the basic stuff or non-urgent stuff or questions and comments you can do through a telehealth visit, so you don't have to go anywhere. So think about that in a 24/7 scale. So instead of going to an urgent care facility or waiting for an appointment the next day, there's someone available through one of the platforms that can talk to you and help you through whatever minor medical issue you may have. Clearly, if you have broken bones, rashes, or urgent or acute issues, you're going to go to an urgent care or a hospital. But a lot of things that people do are basic, that can be done remotely, and the power will be in the devices. The better the device and the more capabilities the device has, the more things we can do at home with monitoring and observation, et cetera, that can provide data back to the physician, and the physician can have a conference call with the individual to kind of discuss a treatment approach, et cetera. So I think it's going to be ever more present. the positive maybe side out of this from COVID is it forced people to do these things where they were uncomfortable because of the risk factors of catching COVID and the safety issues. But once people got over the hump of the uncomfortable feeling of it, they got used to it and they became to enjoy it or like it as an alternative option. You don't have to wait anywhere. The speed of it is very rapid. So, you know, the movement of the population to these types of services and making them available, I think has happened, and it happened in mass. So this will be something that we will keep on forever. If you think about generational concepts, so, you know, the younger generation, they're going to come to expect these kind of services. They're not going to be the ones that they currently don't go to banks. They're not going to go to a hospital unless it's critical, just like they won't go to a bank unless they need a loan or something. But basic activities, they're going to do remotely. And so if we in the healthcare industry can't provide these tools and sets in a kind of remote fashion, we will end up being the loser of the competition, and others will come out ahead. So we have to have the technologies, and they need to continue to evolve.
I completely agree with what Jigar had said. With also the added, it's not just the end user devices, it's the patients taking ownership of their data with their longitudinal health record, which they can now get. If I go to my local healthcare provider, I can download my EMR, I can integrate whatever wearables I have, and I can share that with another healthcare provider. I have a son with special needs, and we've been to a number of different facilities. Boy, would it have been nice when he was younger to be able to share that electronically with these facilities. But we're getting there just at a glacial pace.
Yeah, I'll pick up the last bit of the question is from a device perspective. What can you expect from a device perspective? So my colleague talks about the service, which are absolutely spot on, and it keeps showing the consistency between our three talks. And again, we don't even know each other. So that tells me at least how solid the trends we were talking about is. But from a device standpoint, it's I don't know if that's the answer we'll be looking at. I'm going back to what I said probably several times during this talk, and this is where the standards could at least recommend or mandate practices. That's always a fine line there, but basic practices, not anything crazy complicated. You know, one of the things that stands out, I did talk about the lack of monitoring in the world of security, embedded security. That's one thing, but the other thing I haven't talked about is access privilege to manage various users, right? You get the patient, you get the service company, and you have the device company, and all of them need to have access, will have some level of access to the device. How is that managed from a basic security practice standpoint? From what we see, it's pretty bad right now. So that would be an improvement, one of the major improvements I would expect to see in the device. And again, evangelization by the standards, I hope that will help to bring those common sense practices in the equation.
You all bring up such interesting points. A couple of things we're working on in the standards working group are, from the identity perspective, you know, how to validate the identity, you know, as you know, you were kind of talking about, Xavier. And so, you know, in the old days, we might think of a device registry, an identity, a human identity registry, but you have multiple identities. You know, how are we going to keep track of all this stuff? So that's one of the challenges we're trying to work through. The other one that we're working through that you all made me think about is, you know, in telehealth, as you were talking, Jigar and Chris, about how you have these devices, and, you know, so the doctor is probably going to, you know, use some of the information from your devices because they're not with you, so they can't, you know, do that in person. But how do you actually validate the data and device, right? So how do you know that it's a well-calibrated device? How do you know that the data is correct? How do you know that that it's what you should be using? It's very critical when it's a closed loop system because you're doing sensing and actuating with the data. Now in telehealth, you're not actuating, you know, necessarily, or you could tell them something, they could get some information, then they could do something remotely that would actuate a device like a pacemaker or something. So the question is, how do you validate, the data and device, and how do you enable that interoperability from a trusted perspective? And that's one of the subgroups we have in the working group is data and device validation interoperability. And it's being led by one of our NIH colleagues who's actually an NIDCR, but he's an NIH, so he works across a lot of the different areas. And that's one of the challenges we're trying to figure out.
All very, very fascinating points. And, I'm glad Chris brought up the one about, it's not only about the devices and the management of devices and wearing them, but it's also the data, the patient's data and their involvement with that whole management and distribution of it. And from many different aspects, and IEEE SA is doing tremendous amounts of work in this area on this front. So with that, I actually want Florence to share with you all. I'm going to share it with everybody now. Let's see if I can get it up there. The TIPS architecture framework. This is obviously some of the work coming out of 2933. And she can tell you how what they're doing relates to what we're talking about here today.
Right. And so I totally agree with what came out earlier today in the poll that you can't have like one framework and one architecture. But what we tried to do in the pre-standards work that actually preceded the working group, Maria, when we first met a few years ago on this topic, we started talking about the need to figure out what's needed to enable trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security for clinical IoT from an end-to-end perspective. And we said, well, let's think about this. What are all the different elements? So this isn't the answer, this is more the questions. So what we were thinking about is there are many layers to a framework to enable TIPS, starting with the human, that would be at the top, the user experience and user interface layer. We felt that we have to consider the patients, providers, payers, regulators, pharma, devices, research. These are the different things that are going to have an interface to the information and to the systems. There are many different types of applications: precision medicine, advanced analytics, AI, ML, extended reality, edge, health, real-time medical device actuation. And these boxes can go in a lot of different layers. We just kind of put them somewhere to get started. The integration elements y'all were talking about, what's the beauty of standards is there are so many of them, right? So Fire, Hl7, some of the CCD, Jello, SNOMED, Low Inc, 11073 was discussed earlier today, the different ICDs as they proceed in RDF, which is being used more and more. And so how do we leverage those? And then what about the APIs and the application programming interfaces and the software development kits that allow you to help integrate this stuff, make it interoperable? Then there's the opportunity, as Maria mentioned, to potentially use DLT, distributed ledger technology, for enrolling contracts, contract management. I'm actually on the board for blockchain in healthcare today. And so it's a journal where, we look at applications of blockchain and DLT in healthcare. There's the connection layer, the handshakes, device management, trusted commands, data validation, data ingest and management, and then the data sources and targets on-chain and off-chain if you're going to use a blockchain. And so you can see we have clinical IoT there, a whole area of wearables, implantables, external and environmental sensors, which could be part of the information you use in healthcare decisions. If somebody is overheated, it happens to be 120 degrees where they are, there's some continuity there. The actuators, as we were talking about, you sense and then you actuate, you take an action, and devices that create data using clinical decisions, machine to machine, human to machine, and machine to human. And then, all the other implications, people, the things that the doctor asks you now about your lifestyle, and, and they look at the information your EMR, there might be an electronic data warehouse. So, and then the social determinants of health with structured and unstructured data, genomics. So we have this whole picture. And for anyone who's old enough from the technology perspective, this was like, a service-oriented architecture view, like the SOA architecture from decades ago. And then if you look at all these layers and then up and down on the right, you can see, we say, well, and over all of this, you have to think of security, encryption, federated identity management opportunities, key management, as Javier was talking about before, user management, authentication, privacy, compliance, and governance, and all these defense in depth strategy levels, as we say, hardware, firmware, software, application, and services. So this is a lot. It's like one big mason jar or one big jar or urn of a lot of different things. what we're working on doing in the P2933 working group is pulling this apart and looking at what recommendations do we make and what do they apply to. And our vision is, we agreed when we did this first pre-standards work stream report, is that whatever standard recommendations we come up with or any type of framework, is that it has to be extensible, which means that we can't know all the answers because we don't know all the questions, right? There will be new devices, new regulations, unfortunately, new diseases. Look at us with COVID-19, right? Where we're going to be learning new things and we're going to have to sense and actuate. And so we were trying to put together, what are all the pieces that are part of this complex system of systems? And so that was the idea for this. It's not a framework, as everyone, 76% of the people said on this call, it isn't a framework that you will deploy this, but it's a framework to think of what's important, and then how you kind of maneuver through this. So this could be like a real flashpoint. People would say, this is terrible, and that's fine. We love input. But I'd be interested in what this makes people think, and any recommendations you all have as we think about this. Oh, Terrence, that's interesting. I think one piece that is missing is the environment or space of the patient. I really like that. Thank you for bringing that up. That's great.
Anyone else in the audience who would want to share any comment or ideas to this framework?
Or the panelists, and you could say you hate it. That's okay. We're very open. Things get better when we get input. I'm in academia now, so critical thinking is, means that they sometimes try to make you feel like you're really stupid, but that's okay. I don't mind that. So, I would love some of your thoughts. And this was created 2 years ago now. So, things change very quickly. And so ICD-10 is probably a different number by now, as an example. So, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts.
I think this is a great start. And just as an anecdote, ICD-10 is going to be with us for a while because, at least in the US, we're laggards.
Okay. I remember there was something that kept changing numbers on me. I forgot what it was when we were looking at it.
So Florence, my question is, I know you started 2 years ago. Is this do you see this morphing any differently?
Well, I think it could. I think some of these boxes will grow if you use your imagination, and some of these will grow. Like when I think of extended reality, I think that's going to be used more and more as an example, and that's going to make us think about things a little bit differently. One of my colleagues on P2933, who works at a large device manufacturer, is doing a lot of work in extended reality right now. And so I think that's going to change our point of view on some things. I'm not sure how yet. So I think that's going to be one of the changes. The comment that came up regarding the human's environment, and way, that Terrence brought up just now, and then way at the beginning when we were talking about they could be anywhere. It's not this controlled environment where you're doing, analysis on a human. It's, you're getting data from all over the place. There are a lot of different situations. So I think that will be interesting. For the engineers in the family, for those who are worried about the effects of if we think there's climate change, whether it's due to humans or just because the earth is getting older, like when we get older, our body changes, that will be interesting with the different implications of air quality or more, sandstorms or whatever it is we're dealing with. These, thermozoonotic viruses, which some people think are going to keep growing, that's where pandemics tend to come from. That's interesting. And so is that going to change how we look at things? So I think from the environmental perspective, things are going to be changing. From the technology perspective, some of these things are going to be growing and morphing a little bit. And then regarding blockchain and distributed ledger technology, I'm still concerned about the security implications. It's still hackable. So I have a friend who does blockchain in healthcare systems, and he always makes sure he owns 51% of the nodes so that they can't hack it or fork it on him, which I knew him, way back when. So I know he's very thorough. So I wasn't surprised when he told me that. So, but there may be opportunities to leverage it, but we have to be careful that people don't look at it as a panacea, because it's kind of easy to implement a blockchain. It's not easy to do what microchip does. You have to have a lot of money and a lot of really smart people and a lot of regulations regulation to do what they do. Blockchains can be deployed a little more easily than that. So I worry about that. So I think there are going to be some changes here. And what's important is that we're responsive to the users and we're responsive to the environment, and that we think strategically about where this could be going to improve trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security.
Yeah, I believe one of the other panelists had a comment on the framework. I might have interrupted them. By mistake. Anyone?
Okay, so one of the questions here is, what are some advanced technologies or architectures used in this framework? If you can briefly summarize it, it will be helpful. Sure, there are some old technologies like encryption, but they're still really good. And then the newer ones, it's interesting because artificial intelligence has been around for decades. And but now you can actually use it. We actually have new data science tools and techniques that allow us to do that. And machine learning has been around too, but now it's so it's advanced in that it actually, works now, can be applied. So that's in there. Extended reality has been, going and growing for quite a while, and I think that's going to keep evolving. The blockchain and distributed ledger technology is a newer technology. And it's still, from my perspective, insecure and immature, but that is a newer technology. And then there are new types of devices. So those are the ones that I would pull out at a high level. I would like to see more innovation in federated identity management, in security, in some of those areas, and in authentication and trust and identity. I think we have to think about that a lot more, because we have not just the human identity, like who is this person? Are they really who they say they are? And who's their identity provider? How do we validate that kind of stuff? But you have devices trying to talk to each other, and you have to make sure that they validate each other's identity, that they trust each other. And then you have the humans connected to the devices. Is the right device on the right human? When you're taking, readings or something, is it the right information? And then also, is the right provider, getting into the device and potentially actuating, not just sensing, but actuating. So those are some of the things that I worry about, that keep me up at night regarding tips. And so there are going to be new technologies that help us with that, I think. Some of them will be new processes. Part of what we're looking at is how we use identities in kind of an ecosystem fashion. Some of the zero trust ideas, the self-sovereign identity, the distributed digital identifiers. So we're looking at all these different pieces to see how they come together, and then trying to push the edge where we think something could be made more advanced and more efficacious, as was mentioned earlier. Can you give an example of how blockchain is used? Are any of you using blockchain? Like Chris or Jigger, are you using blockchain yet?
No, I think there's very specific use cases. And right now, there may be a few instances of use cases in the healthcare field, but broadly speaking, it seems to be better utilized in the financial industry, using financial instruments and those types of transactions, than it's maybe as suited in the healthcare side of the house. I'm sure there are niche use cases that are valuable for it, but widespread usage like it is in the financial industry is, from what I understand, not happening in healthcare.
Yes. So a couple of use cases I know about, and if you go to Blockchain in Healthcare today, it's an open resource journal. You can read some of the papers in there. And they actually have their conference coming up in November. I'm going to be doing a couple of like quantum panels there to look at how quantum technology is going to play. That's a newer technology. But some of the things I know are happening in healthcare that I'm okay with are there's a government entity that I know about that is actually using blockchain to share information across government agencies that don't usually share information. So the benefit of distributed digital ledger technology is for people who don't have essential, for organizations and data sets that don't have essential authority, it allows them to share data in more of a peer-to-peer fashion. So that's really where the benefit comes in, I think. So I know some government agencies who are doing that across agencies for government, but they manage it. It's a private blockchain, so they manage it. So that makes me a lot more comfortable. I know one thing we talked about, Marie, you might remember in your session down in Florida, in Orlando that time, and we were talking about clinical trials. So what we were thinking about, and I don't know that it's been deployed, maybe you know, Marie, I haven't been doing a lot in the clinical trial space recently, but we were talking about how the pharmaceutical companies working with the patients and the providers are working on, clinical trials and bringing things to market and getting it, close enough. And then you have to go find people that can actually participate in the clinical trial so you can have statistically significant results so you can get the new medicine out the door or the new process or procedure. And so how that can be difficult sometimes, as we know. So what we envisioned working with some provider advocacy groups is that if you could use a blockchain to actually get the word out to a larger list of people and then get them to connect and say they're interested, it would kind of be like an open way to do almost like crowdsourcing to find people to participate, but you wouldn't be putting secure information on the blockchain. It would be more to find people. So that's one of the ways we looked at what we were thinking of as like a hybrid blockchain. You could have an open blockchain and you could actually have a private one that could actually interact. I remember at the time we were thinking it was kind of like the Olympic, logo with the circles that overlap a little bit like a Venn diagram. So we were thinking about that, about private permission blockchains and open blockchains and the connection there, but making sure that you were keeping the data private that you needed to keep it secure, because blockchains are hackable.
Right. And I think we do a lot of work in the clinical trial space, and where we're seeing even the combination of the blockchain and IoT is more in obviously the supply chain tracking area, like clinical trial supply chain kits being tracked, and as well on the commercial side, the pharmaceutical supply chain, especially when we're talking about temperature sensitive biologics, that kind of thing. So we're seeing now. When I say we're seeing, is that there is pilots, obviously. A lot of them, I will say, are more private blockchains, not your traditional open sort of Bitcoin type of blockchains for these kinds of things. But I think that internally, because they're working with so many multiple different partners in this process, and they're looking for the verification for the grade of the drug arriving in its original place, or more importantly, verifying that a clinical trial kit actually landed where it was supposed to land. There's some really great use cases being done not only in the US, but also abroad in Europe and Africa as well. And I believe there's some going on as well in Asia. So yes, we're seeing quite a bit. And I think about your tips framework, again, in that application as well for the blockchain IoT and those specific use cases. Okay, so great. This has been I knew your tips framework would get a buzz from everybody. It tends to, people really don't, there's so many components and we still always add one more after every session. So this is great for sure. I think I had another open question, not only for obviously our panelists, but as well as for our audience. And this is something, Florence, you and I were playing with the other day around credentialing. And, we talk about, right, when you're in a big hospital system or an integrated, even if you think about in the US, we have a lot of these doctors' offices who are part of a large network. The question becomes, your doctor has access to your health records, right? Be it coming from a wearable or from a hospital or whatever it might be. But if you're part of the network, technically another doctor can access your health records sort of without your permission. So then the question becomes, in this world of connected healthcare and everybody's connected to you, the patient's data, how do we envision potentially even credentialing be different with an integrated system? And so this is sort of a question not only to the panelists, and Chris started to scratch the surface of this a little earlier, but to the audience, like, how do we think about credentialing differently when we talk about integrated system design and systems and technically who's accessing what when? So I don't know if JR, this ever come up in in your world? I mean, I know you guys are a large hospital system.
So it comes up a lot. And I would just say, I think Florence mentioned it. The other big issue that we in the healthcare space and many others are facing is identity, right? So we have identity of our workforce members, we have identity of our patients, and making sure the two interchange appropriately and privately in a secure manner. And in today's world, the access has to be easy, right? Users are expecting easy things because the Apples of the world have created such great user interfaces. So now there's an expectation when users interact with us, there's an ease of use. So in the background, there's all this plumbing that has to happen. But at the end of the day, the doctor, the record, the patient, and their device have to connect, and we have to make it happen. So sometimes it's a very straight path. Sometimes it goes down a bunch of winding roads through interoperability issues and downstream issues. But at the end of the day, we have to make that connection. It's complex. And hopefully over the next 2 to 4 years, the number of wires that are interchanged here are minimized, and we have a more direct connection, which would make it a better experience for all. With less wires, there's less risk of data being stolen or mismanaged, et cetera, because the connections are more direct. Right now, you're going through a bunch of different ways to get to the endpoint. So something could happen along the way that misdirects it, someone messed up a user profile, someone over provisioned a user, et cetera. So we got to minimize all that in order to make that experience better.
Excellent.
I can speak to that. If so, identity. So it's our bread and butter with my team. That's what we do day in, day out, and what we can witness and with the way our business has been growing, habits have tremendously improved. I've said that at the beginning. From 5 years ago, for us, identity on the embedded space, it's all about the keys, right? And then you have the ciphers, the algorithm, and all that stuff. That's standard. That's I don't think that's part of the problem. Is how the keys are being moved from point A to point B across the entire life cycle, starting from where you design your device to where you manufacture, how you deploy it, and how you maintain it when it's on the field there. And the philosophies are pretty simple. You want to isolate your keys, you want to isolate your critical firmwares, and there are technology made available for that. Now, I think Florence made that clear, and that's probably the big dilemma in the world of security is awareness. How do we push enough education that we commoditize that knowledge? How are the university teaching that? It starts with education, everything. So the technology are there, they're working. I would argue I was going to say the phone industry, but it's really the laptop and the server industry have been the first one 20 years ago to implement. So there's absolutely nothing new from a practice standpoint that needs to be invented fundamentally, right? We can go and push. I think the blockchain discussion is good. It's more forward-looking discussion. As of today, the technology is available to isolate your keys, isolate your credential, manage your privilege, meaning you need to isolate your firmwares. And all of that applies to the entire network, right? From the end device, the gateways, and the servers. Physically, those things happen. Now you touch the interoperability side of things, like you were saying. It's the management aspect of those network branches. I'm going to call it that way. Those network branches that needs to be agreed upon as probably the biggest hurdle. And agreed upon means now how are you going to move? How are you going to deal with transfer of ownership? Here's a good one, right? Transfer ownership within one insurance company, within 3 insurance company, across multiple hospitals that are impacted by whatever the insurance company are doing. And now take that problem and cross countries. Now that's a big problem to solve right there. But again, the technologies are there. It's the decision on how you are willing to use the technology in a managed fashion that needs to be agreed upon. That's the decision factor at the executive level is what it's probably one of the the biggest shift that may or may not happen. And it might not happen for very good business reason or very good privacy reasons.
Very interesting. And are any of you using federated identity management? Like Jigger, are you using federated identity management techniques?
Yes, we are using federated. We are trying to leverage modern identity where possible and move to a modern identity. We do have a lot of legacy stuff. And if you think about legacy systems that don't have modern capabilities, those are the ones that really we struggle with. And that's the area that we're kind of trying to focus in on a better approach for identity.
Yeah, this is a big conundrum, and it's going to continue for a while. I hope we come up, we're hoping that through some of the standards work we're doing, we'll be able to come up with some new paradigms and, you know, new ways to do it, thinking about all these aspects. We actually even went all as far as to say, well, what about for like wearables that are kind of like hand-me-downs, like to, you know, underserved populations or countries even? What if they get, you know, sent somewhere? You know, and then you have to deal with that identity change. Very interesting. So, you know, we're trying to look at it from multiple perspectives, not to try to boil the ocean and, you know, and the entire planet, but we're trying to look at the different use cases and then take them one at a time.
And this is compounded as a lot of organizations move to zero trust infrastructure as well.
I know.
The zero trust, yes, that's a whole nother, that could be a whole nother webinar for sure.
It definitely can.
So for our AI experts on the panel, and Florence, someone posed a great math question, but I'm going to get to the question that I think he was going after, which was, you know, pretty much at the end of the day, how do you get a significant amount of patients if there's many, if there's so many different input variables that are significant? So you have X amount of variables, you need this amount of patients to prove X. And so exactly, I don't know, is there a secret sauce? Is there a process? Is like, how do you get there to the right amount of patients?
Actually, I'm going to add another layer to that, and another layer of complexity. How not only do you get the right amount of patients, but do you get the diversity that you need to make the AI algorithms effective across all population groups? I don't think anyone knows that answer.
Now, one of the big topics in data science is data science ethics, right? And knowing that you have a problem is where to start. You know, that you don't have a complete set. And what is a complete set? Like, depending on where you are, you know, you look at that as a different answer. So we actually talk about this quite a bit. And one of the things we do at the Northeast Hub is we have this Northeast Student Data Corps, which we're probably about to change to a National Student Data Corps because it's actually international now. And we provide free online data science education materials, and we have some data science ethics, you know, material there. And we get people to think about, you know, kind of where you're starting, Chris, is not just what algorithms you have and what they're doing, but what data are you using? What data are you ignoring? You know, do you have a complete set of data? Are you looking at the demographics? Are you looking across different types of humans? You know, one of the things this is very simple, but like my family and I know I do, my temperature is very low, like it's 97.6 usually. So if my temperature is 99.6, I have a fever. Most people are like, oh, that's nothing. You're probably just, you know, you got too close to the, you know, the space heater. Like, no, that's not it. I really have a fever, right? You know, so there's different information as a baseline, and it makes you make different recommendations. But at the in all the data elements that we're looking at, there's so many bias issues and so many ethical issues about what data you choose to use and choose not to use. People, you know, will choose not to use certain data because they don't want to think of the whole picture, which is really bad. And then there's, you know, the algorithm. And I've worked with some very bright people from national labs. I remember one person who told me, once you book the algorithm, you're set, just leave it. I'm like, oh my gosh, you can't look at it that way. You know, what if the data changes? What if the environment changes? So there are many different ways to look at this that all kind of concern me. And these are some of the discussions that we're having, like in data science institutes and different data science areas.
Good points. So we have 10 minutes left, and I want to basically share with the audience what everybody's participation was for today and our next workshop. So, this session today was recorded, and obviously all the good conversation, also the chat discussion. So that was really great. And then, like I mentioned, in about 2 weeks, we'll have a documented summary available, like a proceedings from today's discussions to join the other three that I shared earlier in the presentation from the first three episodes. And then before you leave, we'll ask you to take a short survey and tell us, how we can make this experience better, or if you love the way it is, don't change anything. We, like Florence says, we are open to commentary all the time. But our next and final workshop for the 2021 series is going to focus on policy. So little bit today, we got to the FDA, but we're going to get a much stronger conversation on that on our final workshop on the 17th of November. You're all already registered. If you registered for this one, you automatically registered for the entire series. So you can go back and watch those on demand, and the next one coming up. And we hope you do so, because each episode has been a building block. And this is sort of like we're getting to our little peak here. And then at the end of this entire series, we're actually going to put together an outcomes paper, sort of where do we go from here? Where do we potentially go for more standards? Where can policy help? Or where can just overall industry best practices really start to move the needle on these nagging challenges that we're seeing? And so with that, also to let you know, if you're interested in the area of government, we actually have the conclusion of a health series, public health series that we're doing with WWAMI, which I mentioned earlier, which is talking to government executives who are playing with these tools and technologies out there to address all the different challenges we have in the healthcare system. And they're talking about what they're running into and how does that sort of impact their contribution towards policy recommendations in their respective regulatory agencies. So we are going to have a series. We have a Rethink podcast series. We talk about these in short little spurts, like in 10 minutes, all these challenges. We are working on one on AI for good medicine. Obviously, we have a lot of interest in this space. So if anybody's interested, you can reach out to me. If you have a great case study or idea you want to talk about, we're currently in production of that season as well. I just want to say again, a special thank you to Microchip for underwriting this particular workshop. This helps us really continue to advance the initiative and bring the community together to address these challenges. The survey, if you download the presentation, you can click from it directly there. We'll cut and paste and put in the chat. Very quick, 8 questions, multiple choice. We don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to do a special thanks to the panelists. Jigar unfortunately had to jump. He had something to do, obviously, with his day-to-day. But Xavier and Chris and obviously Florence, thank you so much for being a part of this. And you, the audience, you were awesome. You had great questions, great participation. I'm hoping you all left with some great ideas and obviously some opportunities to see where potentially you may want to get involved in some of the work here and the challenges that we're solving. So before I leave, Florence, any comment, insights before we tack off for the day?
Well, I just want to say I've learned so much from the panelists, our colleagues, Xavier and Chris and Jigar. Thank you so much. And I look forward to more collaboration, especially with the whole audience, Terrence and all the others who asked great questions. And I want to thank Macy, our grad student at Columbia, who's done such a great job with the prior events and is helping with this one. She's taking notes and she'll write the report. She does a great job at that. And I want to say that if anybody is interested in getting more involved in this, you could, join the working group, but you can also let us know if you have recommendations on speakers for November 17th. We haven't locked them all in yet, and it's really on technology and policy considerations. So what we like to do in IEEE, we did an ETAP workshop a number of years ago, experts in technology and policy, when we were looking at end-to-end trust and security for IoT. That's where we created the TIPS framework in that workshop 5 years ago in 2016. So we want to bring together technology and policy experts. We'll take output, as Maria said, we've been building through these 4 workshops through today and have these technical considerations, some policy, and then we want to put it on the table with what are the policy implications. In the US, there's the FDA, there's HIPAA, there's GDPR in the EU, there are different countries with different rules there. There's the whole international perspective. So we're looking for an international perspective. So if you know people people that would be interesting to have on a panel, we'd love to know that. And so, you could email one of us, or I don't know if you have an email that they can connect with, Maria, if they want to, or just use mine or yours, how you want to do that.
Yes, I also added my email in the chat. I know you did as well earlier in the discussion. You added your email as well in the chat. So even if you want to write to Florence, you can write to me and I'll pass it on to Florence. No worries. All right, everybody. Well, again, special thank you to everybody today, even our logistics team. I don't want to forget them because they make everything keep going as we progress along. But we look forward to hopefully you all joining us on November 17th for our final in this year's series. And then we'll probably announce what we're going to do in 2022. But until then, we wish you all to continue to stay safe and well and to continue doing the great work you're doing in your everyday jobs and teaching and research and everything else you do.
And thank you, Maria, for being so inclusive and for your leadership. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.